What if you could take that risk, make that change, reach that goal, live your best life? Welcome to another episode of the What If You Could podcast, where we get together with amazing experts and everyday people who share challenges, encourage healing, and explore the possibilities that life has to offer. I'm your host, Gary Scott, and I'm excited that you're along for the ride. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the What If You Could podcast. And today I have a very special guest. We're both boy dads. We're both passionate about our boys and our men and our women and the families and the whole dynamic and that. So we have as our guest Mr. Sean Kullman. Hello, Sean.
Hey, Gary, thanks for having me on today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, you're a special dude. Looked a lot into your books and the stuff that you're doing, so I'm excited to have you on. And if it's okay, I'm just gonna read your bio real quick. Everyone can know who we're playing with.
Sure, you got it.
Cool biz. All right, everybody, we have Sean Coleman. Sean has become the go-to person to actualizing data on male development as is unafraid to talk about male and female differences so that we can engage in the proactive reforms that help our sons and daughters thrive. Sean is a husband and father of two sons. He has spent over 2 decades in education, coaching, writing, research, and community programs. For the last 15 years, Sean has worked with policymakers and the media to rethink the ways we have used social constructs of masculinity to ignore and underlying challenges that hurt our boys and men and the women who love them. His new book, Boys, A Rescue Plan, Moving Beyond the Politics of Masculinity to Healthy Male Development, and co-authored by New York Times bestselling author Michael Gurian, discusses the importance of brain sex difference and other solutions to fixing the poor educational and mental and physical health outcomes that hit our nation's sons more harshly. If you want to have purposeful men, he argues, we need to learn to nurture the nature of boys. And I agree 1000%, my friend. I love that very, very much, being a daddy of boys. But since we're going to get into your book, we've got so much to talk about. But since we are the What If You Could podcast, I do have to ask my What If You Could question. I'm obligated by who myself. So, do you have a What If You Could thought or What If You Could moment, or did you ever look back and go, "Gosh, what if I could have done this or that you'd like to share with us?"
When I think about what if I could, I wish I would have married my wife sooner.
Well, I hope she's listening. What a butt kisser. Holy crap.
I can sling it with the best. There's a little Irish in me. So
That's awesome. Well, how long have you guys been married?
27 years.
Oh, jeez. That's not bad, brother. That's not bad. Well, good for you. And obviously, I'm sure the dynamic is wonderful, and you've got healthy sons, and God bless you for having some healthy children. Um, so, you know, marriage, family, boys, since you brought up the marriage, being about marriage, let's focus on that. I mean, why is the family and marriage and boys, why is all this under attack? What's going on here?
It's really interesting. I was just at a little venue the other day with, if you haven't heard of Brad Wilcox of the University of Virginia, who writes on the topic of marriage, and a sociologist, University of Virginia. Brad does some great stuff. And one of the things we are not seeing in our culture is the willingness of men and women to get married. And there are definitely some cultural reasons for that. And some of that is, go out and get your career and worry about marriage later, or you don't need marriage, and all this kind of stuff gets delayed. I think now, probably more than ever, we need an expectation of marriage for young people. We need to be encouraging marriage as a healthy option, not option, but as a healthy way to live life. And so I think that's a big part of what's happening. And I'm throwing Brad out there again. He's done some great work on this topic. But I do think that our culture is becoming a little more involved with self and the promotion of self instead of the promotion of family. And at the end of the day, I mean, writing and doing the work that I do is fun, but be honest, go watching my son play baseball or going to play golf with my son or just a family. We hang out a lot as a family. when we can, the boys get older and they kind of move on to their own lives, right? As they should. But even growing up, we did a lot of stuff together. We played board games and pinochle and had catches and shot hoops and did all kinds of stuff. My wife, was very engaged in all of that. She was a good athlete. And so I think that it's important that we nurture the precept of marriage and why it's so important. I think we need to talk about it way more openly than we do. And I like to pose a question actually to women out there who are listening. How would you feel if this is a conversation we don't have in schools? And I would pose this question when I was teaching college, and that was, would you be prepared to marry a man who is maybe in a not making as much as you? Or would you be prepared to marry a man who is a construction worker and you're a lawyer? What's the goal? What's the goal for you? Is it to have a family that's healthy and a husband who is participating in that marriage with you and raising the kids and all those other great stuff? So that's a kind of interesting question, because when they did pose it, they never thought about it. So, well, I don't think it would matter. And then you start showing them statistics and they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. And so just posing that question, getting them thinking about what does marriage really mean to me.
You know, wrapping in with the boys and the masculinity and the sons and all that. The dynamic of the fact that it has changed as far as a man can stay home and raise the kids, and a woman can go out and be the breadwinner, right? And that should be acceptable. Um, the challenge with that, it seems, for a lot of relationships is even if the man and the woman both have equal jobs, the woman still has the job of the parenting and the mother and the cooking and the shopping and the laundry and all that stuff. And the man is still just go to work 9 to 5 and thinks he can come home and dinner's going to be ready, even though his wife just worked as hard as he did on her job. I think that when you may be fairly similar to me because you sound the same. I mean, my sons, they are the cooks in the family. They go shopping, they do the laundry. They don't expect their wives or their partners to do all that stuff. But can a man stay home and raise the kids and the woman go out and be the breadwinner and still it be acceptable in today's world?
I think it's hard. And I think it works. Don't get me wrong. I think there's real possibility there. But a man has to have a purpose. He has to have a purpose.
Yeah.
Because without purpose, then that's when things happen. And I think that I would like to see men and women talk about it more openly, and so that when things are hard in a relationship, there are pathways for them forward to keeping the family together. At the end of the day, it really is about the man and the woman collectively trying to figure out, how do we make this work as a unit, right? Because things, and you've been there, things that seem to bother you, you look back at them 10 years later and really it was a pimple on the bum, right? And
Yeah.
so I think that that's really, really important, is for young women to think about that and say, hey, what happens if I go do this and he does that? How are we going to make it work? How's he going to feel? Is he going to feel as though he's not a contributor? All those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And you have to do something. And I think for men, they're not going to feel comfortable doing that. But I think you're seeing a shift to it a little bit more, and more openness.
You hit on purpose, and that to me is like the biggest part of it. I do believe that historically men, the breadwinners, I mean, all the way, let's go back to cavemen, woman stayed home, she cooked up Tyrannosaurus Rex, took care of the kids, men were out there defending the cave, right? And went and killed the dinosaur and dragged it back. Um, they were the leaders of the family. They were the providers. They, did their job as a men, and women did their job, as a woman. And I do see, I mean, you see it. I know you do because you wrote about it, but men don't have a purpose, especially the boys. I mean, the younger men are so lost. I mean, God, what a brutal time to be a teenager right now, right? I mean, just they're completely lost. They don't know what they're supposed to be, what they're supposed to do, who they're supposed to be. It's really tough out there.
Well, and I do think that the purpose void is a phrase Warren Farrell uses in the Boy Crisis book. And so I think that giving boys purpose is really important, and not purpose that is not in the interest of themselves and not in the interest of the community. So many schools you'll go to, they really are geared for girls. They are sitting still for long periods of time, not moving around. The pedagogical approaches are really, really important, which is what we talk about in the book, is the significance of brain sex difference. And so if you are not going to understand sex differences and understanding, say, for example, the male brain happens on a spectrum and the female brain happens on a spectrum. So a female who is a little bit seems a little bit more toward the other side and toward the male side doesn't mean she's not a female, and vice versa for the male. And so I think it's being really conscious of brain sex difference in order to teach our kids and help our kids thrive so that they do see that they have purpose. But when you're in school, and I want you to think about this even like a middle schooler, where they're learning about things like toxic masculinity, they don't know what they're just trying to figure out how to do math, and they're trying to figure out how to read, or they're hearing about things, the patriarchy. It's really interesting if we really want to look at the evolution of modern culture and women in the workplace more robustly. It's a fairly recent thing, right? Really after World War II and those sorts of things. If people didn't live together and mothers were raising children and dads were out working and coming in the fields, that was most of life. You died, your children died. That's what happened, right? And so we evolve into the society where now we can do other things where women can work, and it's important that we have women in the workforce in all kinds of areas. But I think part of it was exploited with um, the kind of cultural revolutions that moved away from like first wave feminism, which say was about equality, opportunity, meritocracy, and it morphed into something else, which is where these terms come out that kind of go after men. In our book, Michael uses the phrase feminophobia, which is the fear of the feminist lobby, right? Because I was on a call with a policymaker's chief of staff, and we were talking about issues in California and why we don't have a California commission on the status of boys and men, but there is one on girls and women, which gets millions and millions of dollars every year. And he said to me, I mean, he was honest and I appreciated it. But what he said to me was, how do you have a political future if you even talk about boys and men? And I said, well, just let's tell the truth, they're dying. 80% of your suicide deaths are male, over 75% or so of your overdose deaths are male. 70% of your alcohol deaths are male. They're your primary homicide deaths. All those sorts of, all boys of all races are behind their female counterparts in reading across every racial group. The same is happening in college. All boys of all races are behind their female counterparts in educational attainment at the collegiate level. And so we see these patterns and we don't do anything about it because there's a fear that there'll be a backlash. And that is, I think, the latter part of feminism that wasn't working on things such as meritocracy, equality, equity. I mean, there was something like at least this is a minimum of 10 offices of women's health. There are none for men, even though their life expectancy is less, they're more likely to die of all sorts of things sooner and have all kinds of afflictions. And so I think that it's important for us to say, we need to really look at this issue of what's happening in schools, but it's not just schools. It is across the board in mental health, physical health. One of the things I like to pull out there is people don't realize infant males are more likely to be victims of homicide death than infant females. Well, why is that? There are reasons for it. Infant males are more likely to die of respiratory diseases. Why is that? And a lot of that's chromosomal. The Y chromosome is a more fragile chromosome. And so there are real reasons. And so when we don't discuss sex differences, and I'm looking at our culture now where we're talking about sex differences in sport and the idea of men not playing in women's sports, well, where's the conversation about differences in the brain and how that manifests itself in our educational outcomes and how we teach, how it manifests how boys and men deal with trauma or depression and things like that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. But I think even going back, and I want to touch on what you said, going back I've had this conversation with a thousand people. I mean, my wife and I, we decided she was going to stay home and raise the kids. We wanted two boys. We wanted them back to back. That's what we put in the universe, and that's what we had. Our boys are 16 months apart, back to back boys. Mom was going to stay home. She was going to raise the kids. I took a job waiting tables. I was still early in my real estate career. I'm like, I don't care. I'll work my way through the real estate during the day, and I'll wait tables at night. My wife's staying home. A lot of people really hammered us for that because my wife had a job. She's a travel agent. But we both decided that was the most important. I think a lot of this female going to work thing was a scam by the government. Like, all right, gals, go out, empower yourself, burn your bras, leave the house, get in the workforce, and pay taxes, and we'll take care of your kids. You just don't worry about your children. You can have them if you want. We'd prefer you didn't, but if you have them, we'll take over your kids as early as we can, and we'll just raise your kids for you. Don't worry about it. You go work. I don't think that turned out well, right? And I think like what you're seeing, what you're talking about with the schools is, I mean, that's been going on for a long time, and I think it's not healthy.
So it's interesting. So when we moved from the Pennsylvania to California, we left for my wife's job and I raised the kids. Right. Now I went back into writing and researching and all that kind of stuff, but I mean she was breadwinner. And so, but I have a background in education and sports. Like I was probably more adept. I mean, she's tremendous, don't get me wrong. We did all kinds of things. Like every week we went and saw her for lunch, like every week, sometimes twice a week. We did all kinds of things to make sure we got time together. Right. And that's the kind of stuff you can do. And so things are flipping and changing, but the man does have to have a purpose. But I do believe that whether women were in the workforce or men were in the workforce and who's staying home, the role reversal thing is not as easy. It's not just, hey, let's flip and it'll all be better. It's a little more complicated than that. But I do think we do have to look at how there's been less of an emphasis on the family structure. That when X happened, why did Y happen? So for example, Warren Farrell talks about this, and back in the 70s when he was the first, I think it was 70s or 80s, I don't remember now. It must have been 70s. He was the first chair. He served as the chair of the National Organization of Women in New York for 3 consecutive terms. First male to do it. So he's friends with Gloria Steinem and all that kind of all those people. And so one thing that Gloria Steinem knew was that the best thing in a divorce situation or separation was for the child to see both the mother and the father. Well, despite that, she opted, I'm not going to say that. And the reason I'm not going to say that, at least this is kind of quoting to Warren, and he's written about this, is that I need to keep the organization strong. So the organizational thing trumped what was best in the best interest of children. And I think that goes to what you're saying, right? Where we threw everyone in there. We're not going to worry about the family unit. At the end of the day, it's always about the kids and how do we raise healthy children so they're healthy members of society, they're healthy members of community, and that sort of thing. And I think what we're seeing is a backlash to that, and in a big way. I think it's 40% of children are born to unwed parents now, and so it's a huge number.
40%?
Yeah. And
Oh my
so
God.
we're seeing these huge numbers, and where are these kids going? What's happening? I can tell you what happens, at least with boys. Boys who come from single parent homes, and there are problems with girls too. I mean, so greater chances of drug addiction, greater chances of criminal activity, greater chances of all sorts of things, violence, teen pregnancy. All those things happen in greater numbers when you don't have a structure. And so when you look at the numbers of kids, I mean, it's millions upon millions of children who are in single parent homes. That doesn't mean they might not have a grandparent or something around or aunts and uncles, but we wouldn't be seeing what we're seeing in our educational system as well. So the educational system has to adapt as well to different pedagogical approaches. So we don't want to decrease rigor, right? We want to make sure the rigor exists, but we also have to recognize the situations we're in. So and we do this in the book, I encourage people, to look into doing some of these things on their own. When you really look at a kid coming into your classroom as a teacher, is if that parent if that kid has three siblings and it's one parent at home and there's no one else to help, that kid from the get-go is going to have a harder time statistically, right? In the aggregate, that's what's going to happen. So how is our school system functioning to deal with that male brain, right? When he's not really getting the type of nurturing, right? Nurture the nature of the boy, nurture the nature of the girl. Their nature is real, and we know their nature is real. And so we have to nurture that and understand that. And so if you already have a missing component, you're already a little bit behind the eight ball. And so we need to be smart enough in our educational system to say we have to deal with this problem and offer a different type of school day. A community where 75%, 90% of the kids are coming from two-parent homes, and a family where 30% are coming from two-parent homes. That's a very different school.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's not a lot we can do really about helping the family dynamic. I mean, when two people get together, whether they have kids or not, they separate, whatever. We're all individuals. So that's a challenge. But how we treat the children, we can focus on. Once the kids are here, we can focus on. But having that dynamic of the family, right, is so important. Whether you learn watching your father, you learn watching your mother, you learn how they interact, you learn if you've got a little brother, a little sister, how to share, how to be kind, how to just live a certain way. When you're maybe a single child with a single parent, you're not getting that kind of well-rounded sort of training. Just not even training, just through osmosis, just being in it, right? Especially watching parents who get along, watching parents who love each other. You become a different sort of boy. You become a different sort of man, I think, if you're raised through that. And I think it's so important to try to, you can't have people stay together who just aren't happy, right? But I
No.
think people need to understand that that dynamic is just crucial to the upbringing, to the up growing up of your children, right?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think the modeling is really important, and there are situations that don't have that, and that's why you need other men to step in. You really
Yeah.
do need other men to step in. I mean, Mike, we talk about the three family system, and Michael's talked about this before in his other books. And so you have mom and dad, and then outside that you have the aunts, the uncles, the grandparents, all that, and then you have another layer, which is your coaches, your pastors, your teachers, right? There's this three-leveled system that is really about raising a healthy boy. And so if you're not getting any sort of male mentoring at home, and then you're not getting any kind of male mentoring in that second layer, now you're entering the third layer. You're probably going to get it through coaches, which is why I'm a really big believer in the importance of youth sports is really critical, and really strong programs that are important. I don't know if you're familiar. There's so many good ones. I mean, the YMCA, people don't realize, was the Young Men's Christian Association, and that's what
Yeah.
it was, right?
Yeah.
CYO, Catholic Youth Organization, all across the country that provides Little League. All these things are opportunities for young men to be coached by men, right, and boys to be coached by men, and be in that atmosphere. And so I think that's really critical for those kind of kids. And you can tell the mothers who came from single parent homes, when you were coaching them, they were thrilled to have these,
Mm.
2, 3 men who were coaching their sons. They're yearning for it. And I've had mothers come to me and say, I'm so happy, he doesn't have anyone in his life. And you really take it to heart. It makes a huge difference. And our schools need to do that too. Our schools need to realize that maybe their educational day needs to be a little different. We know programs that do work in schools. The Gurian Institute does amazing work in schools, everything from some of the poorer schools where everyone's on free lunch to private schools. The system works when you're looking at a brain sex difference approach to learning. And so I think
Yeah.
that when we really start talking about those differences, and we really start talking about how we're going to mentor young men who aren't coming with a man in their life, we really got to be conscious of, well, what's going on in the brain. You can go through becoming a teacher in the whole entire educational system and never learn about what's going on in the brain, which is amazing to me, because the scans are out there. We've known for decades that there are differences. And some of the coolest stuff I saw coming out of Stanford University is they're using artificial intelligence and having people perform tasks, and they can very accurately predict if it's a male or a female performing the task. And so that kind of stuff needs to work its way into teaching programs. Well, what's going on in the brain? And so when I teach what's going to happen to the boys and what's going to happen to the girls.
Yeah. You touched on so many great things there. I think I want to come back to what you spoke about earlier, though, is about, the fear of speaking up. And then that seems to steamroll into the fear of being role models because there's just so few good role models for the young men. But when you get the community involved, when you get the coaching involved, when you have the role models, that just makes such a difference for these kids, these children. I coached forever. My wife was always the team mom. We sponsored the team. But it seems to be that fear of speaking out has also become the fear of wanting to be a role model, the fear of wanting to be a coach. It's like we've 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 made this stigmatize these guys who do this and these gals who do this. Um, it's a hard thing to step up and say, I want to be involved with children, right? And people look at you like, what do you mean you want to be involved with children, right? It's a horrible thing, you know what I mean? We've got to get rid of this craziness. Like, you know what? Men could coach boys, all right? This is okay. Boys need role models. Boys need men in their lives. It's okay to say that, right? We've lost that.
We have to have it. And you are seeing it. I mean, when I look at youth organizations I've worked with, like one I'm working with, we're looking at 2,000 volunteers who will participate, a lot of men coaches. We're talking like 15,000 kids who are participating in
Wow.
various parishes throughout the Oakland Diocese in California. And what I see is just, and moms and dads are super involved. There's a lot of dads coaching their sons and they're coaching their daughters, all sorts of things. And so strong men speak up. They're like, well, yeah, I'm going to coach and that's what I'm going to do. And I want to kind of empower young men as well to not be afraid to say, hey, when you're discussing this topic, we talk about, the bravery of speaking up. Um, so I'm kind of, I think where this is partly going is having the confidence to speak up and say, no, I matter. My contributions matter. Don't lump me into a group of people, because the overwhelming majority of men, overwhelming 99% or whatever it is, are are not doing anything harmful.
Yeah.
They're not engaging in it. They're not. Overwhelmingly, men are not doing harmful things, and women are not doing harmful things. Overwhelmingly, I do think we have a system in place that tries to, like I said, the offices of 10 offices of women's health, for instance, and nothing on men, or multiple sports. I think it's 42 states that have commissions on women and girls. It's great. They're doing research. They're educating policymakers before they make decisions on spendings, things like that. But we're not doing it for boys and men. That's just absurd to me.
No.
I'd be just upset if it were converse. I'd be like, well, what are you doing? Like, wake up. And so I do think it takes men to step up and say, no, we're not going to do that. And we are going to make sure that we have role models that are here, and the kind of role models that really help build and drive what's innate in many boys. Risk taking. You want risk taking to be directed, right?
Yeah.
Aggressiveness or assertiveness, right? Boys are aggressive. Michael talks about, and I talk about aggression nurturance. People confuse aggression with violence. Violence is not aggression, and we need aggression
Yeah.
and risk taking and all those sorts of things. And so we have to have men who step up and say, no, I'm not going to agree to that,
Yeah.
and be prepared um, for what's coming back. Because I do think people are there's a real hunger for it now, and you're really seeing it now. There's a
Yeah.
real hunger right now for a little bit more of the male in our culture.
Well, it's desperate. I mean, we're at a real tipping point. I mean, I feel personally, I'm no expert. This is just my personal opinion. I mean, I feel that we're at a tipping point here. It goes back to what you said earlier. I mean, when I was coaching, I don't know, one of my boys now, say 20 years ago, right? When I was coaching their soccer, which I had no clue what I was doing, but it was easy because they were little. But coaching, the flag football and the t-ball and the little league. I mean, we just coached everything, whether I knew what it was or not, right? But I mean, like you said, so many times some mom would come up and say, "Dude, we're so grateful that you're here doing this because my son just adores you, adores your son, the family component you guys have. Just thank you for being there and being there for my son, right? Because his dad's a douchebag. I never see my dad. I know he never sees his dad, right? But it always broke my heart. Or you'd get the call, hey, can you keep Jimmy for another hour because I'm late at work, I'm tied up at work, whatever. No one took advantage of it, and but it was that trust of saying, "Hey, I'm trusting you with my child,
Yeah.
right?" And you're special to him. You mean something to him, which means something to us. It's going to make a difference in that boy. And now I see these kids now that they're in their 30s and they're having kids that I've raised, with my boys. Oh, they're still the same. I'll go up and kick them right in the nuts. I mean, we'll still just do stupid shit like we did when they were little, because that's how we bonded, right? We goofed around. We were guys, and there's a loss of that. And I think men and boys need to make a real strong comeback, and it has nothing to do with being against women, right? It's being for our women and our wives, right? It's not against anybody.
Well, I'm going to give you the perfect example because it's pretty relevant, or pretty relevant. It's relevant, but it's pretty recent is what I was looking for. I'm sorry, it's relevant and recent. And you saw that? Did you watch the Super Bowl by chance? And so
Yeah.
there was a great Super Bowl ad, which was a horrible Super Bowl ad, but could have been a great Super Bowl ad, and it was for flag football. I don't know if you remember the flag football commercial, but I wrote a piece on that forward to you. So the commercial is promoting girls in flag football, an easy sell, an easy sell. But the commercial is built on boys and men who are toxic and patriarchal and look down on women. And that's the whole commercial. And I thought to myself, that's actually what's not happening on high school campuses. The boys are supporting the girls. The girls are supporting the boys. They're going to each other's games. They're cheering each other on. And instead of taking that moment, and you haven't, just look up the Super Bowl commercial on flag football. Just if you get a chance to play it, and your listeners, just look it up, and how differently it would have been if the NFL would have actually chose love, which is the motto they want in their end zones: choose love. Well, that commercial did not choose love. And what I would have said is as the boys are walking down the hallway, you could have had the principal who's completely shown as this, male patriarchal figure who's a fool. And instead of a principal who's saying, you're ready for the big game, and the guys talking about the game, and then all showing up at the field and watching the girls play and saying, look at her run, all that kind of stuff, which is really what's happening, right? Instead of doing that, I think it was a backlash from the election. And I think that they missed the opportunity to choose love because they went with that rhetoric that kind of gets under our skin. And that's when I think men need to come up and say, that was really awful commercial. And they should write the NFL and say, like, it was an awful commercial. Because I actually go to the girls. So I'm dating someone and I'm going to her basketball games or her lacrosse games or soccer or whatever it is, black football. That's what we're doing. And so I think there should be a little bit of an opportunity to say, you missed an opportunity. It wasn't funny to me. It just completely missed the mark.
Yeah. My boys now are 10 years out of high school, 15 years, whatever, out of high school, 12 years out of high school. But I never remember any weirdness. I mean, God, my sons totally supported their girlfriends who were in sports. And, I don't even want to use the word tomboy because I don't know if that's fair to girls anymore. I don't know. But most of the gals that we knew, right, were in sports. They played sports. My brother has four girls, and they're all outstanding athletes. I mean, from cheer to dance to softball. One of them's in the Softball Hall of Fame. I mean, we just never even looked at it like, well, the girls couldn't play or we don't support the girls or anything like that. So to make it seem like something like now all of a sudden the girls are now coming into their own in sports and guys aren't supporting them is complete madness. That's just totally the stupidest thing I've ever seen. That's horrible.
There's actually been a decrease in male participation in sports and an increase in female participation in sports because programs are being cut,
Yeah.
boys. And so, so especially at the collegiate level. And so I agree with you. I think that there's more support for this. And I think that's where we should be going. And I think that when it's people need to call it out when it comes. I think that classification that you're using is targeting me as part of a group that I'm not part of. And I think it's important to call it out professionally and
Yeah.
let's look for the real solutions. What's the goal here? And we shouldn't use these stereotypes to punish people.
Why are why are people preaching toxic masculinity? Where did this crazy town even come from with toxic masculinity? What is this? What's going on with that?
So, well, I think I have a kind of a long explanation of it, and hopefully people will read it. And I would probably say it started really beginning. I've kind of drawn lines this in different ways, but you take a class of people and you target them with something, and that way, it's the oppressor oppressed narrative, right? There's those who oppress us, right, and there are those of us who are oppressed, and so that's where we are. And so the toxic masculinity falls into that same exact concept. And you may remember this as well. Black males were targeted for a long period of time. And they were, I've heard of a couple of writers who've talked about it, uh, where they use the word the interloper, right? The interloper into your community. Well, that morphed into not black males are mischaracterized. Then it morphed into other males. And now you go from one, now you're decades removed and you're at toxic masculinity. All of it does the same thing. It tries to take a group of people and associate them with oppression. And that's where toxic masculinity really comes from. And so any person, no matter who they are, could be harmful to another person, right? So it's not innate, it's human nature to be kind or not be kind, to be cruel, not be cruel. And so that toxic masculinity term, which came around a number of decades ago, was purposeful. And its purpose was to, you know, um, keep a movement going by marginalizing other people. And many men who I know who were involved in those movements in the 60s, who are, writers who have been around for a long time, who were involved, and they're saying, well, I wasn't toxic then, and my sons and grandsons aren't toxic now. And so, yeah, that's what I think it comes from. It's just a way to take a group of people and label them something as unhealthy, and that's the purpose of it.
We love our feminine women and we love our masculine men. I mean, that's just what is wrong with that? There's absolutely nothing wrong with
Well, there
that
are
as
good
far
leaders.
as if
There are
that's
good
how
female
people
leaders and there
live.
are good male leaders, right? And there's sometimes there's different approaches. I've had great bosses who are women, great bosses who are men. I've had bad bosses that are women. I've had bad bosses that are men. It had nothing to do with their male or female nature. It had,
They just sucked as a boss.
just they were really good or they really weren't. And so, but there is a different approach I think women take to things and men take to things. And I think when we understand that, it's easier, like understanding female leadership and how it might manifest differently than male leadership. And both are essential. It was Zuckerberg recently talking about we need more male energy in the boardroom, right? He was recently talking about that. And so I don't know if that's just because it's politically expedient or what, but he's suddenly, I mean, this is a guy who's now into mixed martial arts. He's now into fitness. He has found his male nature. That's what he's done. And he has three
it's
daughters and he had three sisters.
Yeah, it's very interesting about that because you're seeing that in a lot of these guys. I mean, like Zuckerberg looked like an automatron. I mean, a couple years back, you just go, dude, what on earth have you done to yourself? You don't even look like a human. Maybe you've morphed into your software. I don't know. But Bezos is all of a sudden this buffed up, right, masculine dude with some hot young new wife. Zuckerberg coming out doing the MMA, Rogan spreading around. Dana White is more popular than ever. He's invited onto the Meta board. I mean, I think you're seeing a break in the dam. But I want to go back to something else you said. But I love that topic because I think it's really a very good movement. But the sex brain differential, you touched on that, but I kind of want to get a better grip, and also the listeners, and they obviously need to get your book. But I mean, so walk me through the sex brain differential, if I'm saying that right, what you
Okay.
talked about.
Male female brain difference happens in utero. Like we know that you're going to be a male or a female. Hormones wash over your brain in utero and determines a lot of what you become. You not become, but who, your sex identity, your XX or your XY. And so the male brain, okay, there's more white, we're looking at white matter and gray matter in the brain and how electrical conductivity works. So I'll put this out and maybe this will make sense to your listeners. So the male brain, when their emotions are high, the the fight flight mechanism is ready to go, and there's less coordination, the prefrontal cortex and verbal centers. Females, trauma is happening. There's a lot of connection between communication and fight flight. There's a lot of communication happening, and they're prepared to have conversation, the way they process. So males are more midbrain, right? And so because things are back, it really takes movement and activity to get them going. I'm going to tell you something for your parents now. And now, as you as a grandpa, you're going to be dealing with this. If you want your kids to talk when they're young, do something physical first, or your boys. So you want to have a conversation because something's on your mind. Go shoot some baskets. I don't care if you're good at basketball or not. Go have a catch. And I'll give you an example. I was working with a young man after he was suspended for using the wrong pronoun in his school. And so we were starting to have a conversation. I'm going to ask him what classes he liked and what he's reading, and he's kind of was indifferent. So there was a tangerine on the table. We started having to catch back and forth with the tangerine. He's a heck of an athlete. We threw it back and forth like 10, 15, 20 times. And then I started asking him questions. So guess what he did? He started talking. Blood flow into the limbic system, get him stimulated, get the brain going, move those boys around. But when you look at brain sex difference, there really is some good chapters in the book. I'm going to push because it explains it much more clearly. But it really is understanding how um, different degrees of white matter, different degrees of gray matter, how electrical conductivity works in the brain at particular times, whether you're experiencing trauma, whether you're in sport, what happens. And so I think those things are really, really important. And so when we look at give a perfect example, um, the male brain tends to process things on both hemispheres this way, almost separately. The female brain, that's why I'm doing my hand gestures now, is cross talking. So there's a lot of this, right? A lot of prefrontal cortex stimulation, and there's a lot of this. So back and forth between both sides of the brain. That's why emotion and words are connecting. Whereas it's not that the boy isn't, he's sitting on it for a little bit of time. So we've known this through all kinds of scans, different universities all over the world. And that's what you see. So when I get to that brain sex different component, I'm just trying to give your audience
Yeah.
a sense of what's happening in the brain on left hemisphere, right hemisphere versus both hemispheres connecting more so. And
So
we
is
have to
it?
do that to survive. The male skull is bigger.
Mhm.
Why? Right. And so with the Y chromosome, you have a bigger body, a bigger skull because you are going to be combative, right? The female brain is built differently. And it doesn't mean they're not capable of things and that boys and girls are not capable of great things, right? And so I think that might be the best way to explain it to them is just gray matter, white matter differences, how things are processing on one side and the other side versus cross connection.
You brought up so much there, and it made me think of a couple of the things that you touched on earlier, which was boys maturing later than girls, or they have in the past. And I'm wondering if it's using what your example of what you said is about the movement is that because boys become so sedentary now, their diets are so horrible, their testosterone level is like zero, Right? And so they're maturing later, and I'm wondering, it's just the lifestyle of these boys is so against their nature of what they're supposed to be doing and how they mature and how they grow and how it enhances their brain, how it gets to the parts of their brain that are supposed to be working. So instead of just sitting around all day on their phone or on the computer or on their laptop or playing video games, whatever, they need to be out moving to get that to so to get that functioning.
Well, think about what you just said, which is true. And Dr. Carol Swain wrote really well about this, about the drop in testosterone in men. And so, you're seeing our young men now, there's less testosterone in the system. Well, what is lack of testosterone? It's a comorbidity, right? And so that makes sense why there's greater depression. That makes sense why there's other things happening, which is, you're right, we need to get them active and moving and going and fit and all that. And so our school system needs way more play in it. It's funny, I talk to older educators, grandmas now, right? And who were teachers, they're now 75, and they're talking about, why don't we have more play in school? They see it, they know it. They're like, if you don't move those boys around, they're going to be a problem. And it's not because they're a problem, it's because the pedagogy is a problem. And so you're right about what you're saying, about moving them around, getting them active. And there are schools that do a nice job of doing that. And so I think, bringing in a boys and girls learn differently model helps both boys and girls.
Get them moving around a little bit and get that testosterone, get work on their
And it helps the
diet, the
girls.
kids'
It helps
diets.
the girls too. It helps
Yeah,
the girls too. It
yeah.
doesn't hurt them.
The earlier you had mentioned to me about citizen boys. Is that the term you
Citizen
use?
science.
Citizen. I'm sorry.
Citizen science.
Ah, okay.
So so
Help
so
me with that.
I encourage people to become citizen scientists in their own community. So we explain in the book to go to your school district and collect data. And all data should be disaggregated the same way. But but at the intersections of race and sex, by both race and sex. So if you're looking at educational outcomes and you're doing it by race only, it's always going to be conflated. It's always going to be inaccurate. And the reason is, if you're not disaggregating by, say, Asian male, Asian female, black male, black female, and so on down the line, Hispanic, Native American, whatever, down the line, you don't see that, oh, wait a minute, why are boys always behind their female counterparts? Most school districts don't disaggregate data that way. They'll do it by total sex, maybe, right? Male, female, like, okay, you get that. But then you see the bigger problem, right? And so you can do that. Any person, and I would encourage every PTA person in the country to get your data, just look at what we do, and look, I could do this, right? And get it from your school district. And if your school district's small, that makes it a little bit harder, but you can expand out to your state. And the data is there. The same thing is in mental health. You go onto the CDC website, we walk people through this, and you can look at your state, you can look at homicide deaths, you can look at suicide deaths, you can look at overdose deaths, you can look at alcohol deaths, and you can disaggregate it by race and by sex. You'll see like examples of that in the book. Well, I could do that. I could go to my policymaker and say, why aren't we doing anything for mental health for boys? Right. And it gets back to something you were saying earlier, you know, uh, but maybe it wasn't expressed this way. Too often we see boys as defective girls. Our culture is presenting boys as defective girls, and they're not. They're boys. And so we have to move away from that model. And even when I was teaching, when I first started, I saw stuff with the boys, and I could be a little firm for sure. But I wasn't. I was like, here's the deal: we're going to work it out ourselves. I'm going to call your mom. What do you want me to do? Right? I was kind of, let's be men about this. Before I teach college stuff and teaching high school, let's be men about this, and we'll deal with it. And so I used to, it'd be something simple like, come after school, you're going to clean my desktops. And it was like very few words were exchanged. And usually there was a treat, cookies or whatever. And we got each other. We got each other. I'm sorry. And it's it. It was over. There wasn't an hour meeting with the principal. There wasn't an hour meeting with your parents. The boy has moved on. Let him move on. but accountability is important. And so, but boys are not defective girls. And that's what I see in our presentation in culture. And so I encourage people, if you're a citizen science, break down, please, what's going in your school district by sex and race at, those things, break them out, break it out in your state. I'm going to tell, I already know the numbers and I haven't been there yet, because I've done so many state reports at this point of my life that, I'm finishing one right now in Tennessee. And, I know the numbers, I can see them. And people are uncomfortable dealing with those numbers in part because I think people already know.
Yeah. I talked to a gal a while back, and I'm so sorry. I can't acknowledge her and give her her name. But she started a program called the Mentorship Program. And she went to these senior homes and got these retired folks who were CEOs, pilots. She's got some astronauts, she's got some Nobel Prize winners, and they were just dying in these places. They had no purpose, like we talked about before, right? And she's gotten them to come out and start talking with kids and meeting with kids and going to the schools or the Y or wherever else they're allowed to go talk to the kids. And not only has it changed these senior citizens' lives by giving them a purpose again, but these boys meeting with the men or the women or however she sets it up at the meeting, but is giving them this different sort of encouragement, right? Because we're in such a negative world where you can't do anything. You can't do that. You can't do this. You can't do that. You can't do that. These folks, men and women, seniors, are mentors for these kids, and it's fantastic because these kids turn around so quickly because they're all, either they're from foster care or they're from broken homes. She takes those kids. Um, we just need more and more role models, mentors to come out and step up and start doing this stuff. It's really crucial to our boys and our girls.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think having that male presence is critical as it is having female presence. And
Yeah.
so we both bring a little something to the table.
And for the mental health, I mean, you were talking about the mental health. I mean, it's a real crisis right now, don't you think? I mean, the kids. I know specifically for the boys because they're just getting tossed all over the place, but even for the girls, I mean, and we're in just such a weird world right now, um, where I think the mixed messages are all over the place. I don't think these kids know what to do. It's tough enough being a teen and going through puberty and all this stuff, and then you're being confused about all sorts of things. I mean, I think mental health is really struggling with these kids.
So think about a boy when he's starting to go through puberty. He's getting like 7, 8 testosterone injections a day, essentially. Right? So when I was going through my education courses, um, there were sections you read on girls and the menstrual cycle and be aware of this. No talk whatsoever about males and testosterone. And I remember reading this and I'm thinking, okay, and this is decades and decades ago. So just so you can imagine decades and decades of that playing out, right? And so your mentoring programs that you're talking about, the boys, they love the like grandpa figures and they just laugh. They come home. I remember, my sons went to Catholic school and they would talk about the night. I don't know if you know Knights of Columbus, which is a ministry in Catholic. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they would talk about the older guys. Hilarious. They would just, they charmed them, and they were funny and they moved tables and chairs and there was something happening, right? There was a male energy. And I wrote about male energy and that's what I see happening in our culture today. That backlash against particular types of men is really a push against male energy as I see it.
Yeah.
Assertiveness, aggression, again, healthy aggression. And you're seeing this, and I think there's a little backlash to male energy. And that's I think what we're seeing right now.
Yeah. Do they let boys, girls, do they let kids play dodgeball and stuff like that in school anymore? Or is that
You
taken
know,
off
I
the, is
I
that too
don't know. My
aggressive?
guess would be it's probably removed. I remember playing dodgeball. You remember playing dodgeball? It was tremendous. I think they might do it. I'm not sure. I'm sure
I
some.
can still smell that and hear that ball in my head right now. I can smell it. I got hit in the face so many times with that ball. But it wasn't aggression and it wasn't mean. It wasn't, I mean, we had lawn darts when we were a kid. All right. We'd throw lawn darts off the roof to try to hit each other. I mean, we just did stupid stuff and built forts and climbed trees and, just rode motorcycles off our roof. I mean, we did stupid stuff. And I just think, I'm not sure if it's so easy to blame video games and social media and stuff like that, but I just think it's so much more than that. I think it's just a loss of community, like you said, a loss of play, a loss of fun. Kids are expected to grow up so quickly now, but they're not even told how to grow up or given tools to grow up. They're just told to grow up. The family dynamic is so damaged. The schools are a complete disaster. I know teachers are hardworking people, administrators. Don't mean to pick on all of them. I don't want to pigeonhole all of them, but overall, you see the schools are failing pretty hard. Um, what do you think? I mean, you wrote the book. How are we going to fix all this stuff?
So the title of the book is Boys a Rescue Plan. That's the A title. And then the B title is, what's after the colon, is Moving Beyond the Politics of Masculinity. So masculinity and femininity are social constructs. It's what they are. Moving beyond the politics of masculinity, right, to healthy male development, right? So that's the nurture the nature component. And so we do list organizations throughout the country that are doing different things to help boys, mentoring programs, running programs, all kinds of things, fathering programs, fathers on campus, where you have these programs on many campuses today where dads make an agreement and then the six dads, they're working the lunchrooms. It's amazing. Discipline referrals go down. You see your dad in the hall, all that kind of stuff. So those are mentioned in the book. You could literally say, I could do this in my own community. So there's solutions there. One of the big ones I would love to see, and it is really looking at education through a gender lens. And that is boys and girls learn differently. And looking at that, because I know there's been a lot of success with the Gurian model in schools across the country. And the other thing is things that you can actively do. We talk about the citizen science component, right? Become a citizen science, break this information down in your own community and say like, hey, wow, this is what's happening in our school district. Why aren't the boys better readers? And don't tell me they're defective girls. And don't tell me they can't sit still, right? We've known that for thousands of years, right? In every culture you go to, you're finding the same thing. Every culture, you're finding these same problems. And so what I think needs to happen is we really need to look at it and say, we're going to look at this through a gender lens. We're going to educate our children the best way possible. There are solutions out there. There are working. There's some really wonderful programs that are helping kids by simply allowing them to be who they are in their nature. I do know we do talk quite a lot about things like gender dysphoria is in the book, which is and people need to understand the way Michael talks about it mostly is there's brain sex difference, which is male brain, female brain, and could there be some rare anomaly where you kind of have a kind of like a female like brain? But gender dysphoria is a form of depression. Gender dysphoria is different than say like a brain sex dysphoria, where a male brain may function really like a female and vice versa. Very, very rare, incredibly rare. But all the gender dysphoria that we're seeing, and we need to be conscious. It's easy for people to kind of blow it off, but these are children who are in pain. These are children who are suffering. They're confused about what sex and gender is, because gender dysphoria is a byproduct of a depression. That's really what it is. And so we need to be conscious of that. And so we should be understanding what's going on inside here so we can help them. But if you question anything in our schools today, there like I told you, the one boy who was suspended because he used the wrong pronoun, and there's nothing he did that was wrong, by the way. And he wasn't mean or cruel. He's known the child since they were very, very, since they were children, kindergarten or whatever. And now they're in high school, and a girl comes in dressed like a boy, and he's trying to figure out in his 14-year-old brain, like, what's going on here, right? But the amount of punishment administered to him is, in my opinion, quite egregious. And so those are the things kids are trying to deal with at 14. They need to be playing, learning to read, learning math, playing sports, playing in band. Those are the things that they need to be doing. But there are solutions and we can fix them.
Well, it's even worse than that. And these kids are already starting to get beat up about that stuff at 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old. I mean, before they even have a clue. I mean, they don't have a clue about boys and girls. All they know is maybe girls have cooties. That's about the extent of it. And then you throw in there the fact that, well, Billy, when he goes to school, is Susie in school. And then when he leaves, he's back Billy. And we're not allowed to tell the parents that your son comes to school and then changes his clothes into girls' clothes and wants to be called Susie. Now, that's a problem. I don't care what anybody says. I usually try to use the word challenge instead of problem because I don't like the word problem. I think things are challenges, but that is a problem. And I
Mhm.
don't think that that helps the child in any way, shape, or form, and it certainly doesn't help the family. I have no idea why the schools are doing this. I don't know how this makes sense. You can't give a child an aspirin without contacting the parent, but you can call them a completely different name and have them have a completely separate indictee in school, and they get there. It's madness to me.
Well, and I want to put this another way. So I want you to imagine a child is going, first of all, at 5 years old. I mean, a boy or a girl might dress in clothes, and that's all it is. It's
Yeah.
play. And but what worries me is when schools start taking kids who are older, in particular, and really moving into gender dysphoria. Again, there was a depression there. What worries me the most is that the people most involved in their life are being removed from the process. That is dangerous because what you have is people, and I'm surprised it's you're starting to see a little bit now with lawsuits against doctors who have engaged in the gender transition movement, and you're starting to see the lawsuits happening. I would be shocked if you don't start seeing teachers who are heavily involved, because it's usually a couple teachers, right, who the children go to, and their gender identity is being really discussed with someone who's not a therapist. And really, I'm shocked there hasn't been a lawsuit yet against a school or teacher for, and maybe there has, I just haven't seen it yet, for almost like practicing medicine without a license. It's different, for instance, when a child would come to me and they were feeling suicidal, I would sit, I would listen, but immediately, what did I do? I immediately contacted my administrator and my guidance counselor immediately. I have had incidents where there was one where, and I don't want to get too much off about, you can't play psychologist when you're not a psychologist, and that's what's worrying me about. There are people in school who are engaged in this behavior, and you're removing the most important person in their lives, their mother and their father, and that, and people think they're helping, and I think some people are really well intentioned. I think they think they're helping, um, but they're in no position to really be handling it. So I wouldn't be surprised at some future point in time if it's a teacher who's done it with a number of kids. They now say you're basically acting like a therapist because you're not reporting it and not reporting it to the parents. One quick one for you here, Gary. I was teaching, and a student had sent an email. This is at a university. A student sent an email telling me that he was feeling sad and depressed, a little suicidal. I'm going home, and so I immediately called, and it was a weird scenario because it was a Friday. I'm sorry, it was a Friday, and it was a Friday, and I was out of the wedding with my wife. I got home late. I couldn't sleep. I was all geared up after the wedding, and so I decided to look at my email. I look at my email, and there's this email from the student saying, "I missed class today, feeling depressed, and I think it said suicidal." But something about it didn't sit right with me. I immediately called the health center at the university. So we got it taken care of. Well, I didn't sleep the whole night. I woke up, and I just said, "The hell with it. I'm going to call the parents." I mean, he's an adult. Technically, it's university. So I called the parents, and I said to them, I said, "Hey, is so and so in Haskell? He just took the car and he's going out." And I said, "I need you to be calm and I need you to listen to me. I need you to ask him to immediately come home. I don't care what kind of excuse you make. You need the car for something. And they said, okay. I said, but I need you to do it calmly. And they did it. And then we talked. And I showed them the email. I'm really worried. Well, he came back home and he was about to go kill himself. Um, I, someone from the university and ultimately reached out to me. They pulled the kid from school and, all that kind of stuff. But that's what I had learned from them. And I don't know what it was, but I think it was partly when a male expresses, I'm deeply depressed and I'm going home, it was broke up with a girlfriend or something like that. She dumped them or something like that. I'm deeply depressed. Again, I'm trying to recall the note offhand, but it was the way he said it. Boys don't generally do that. I remember him from the class. He was kind of a quiet kid. I'm a listener, an observer, but that I remember. I was like, this doesn't sit right. This is a call for help. When they verbalize it like that, it don't blow it off. And you need to bring the parent in. And that's what I did. And that's my point is what did they do? They immediately brought him in and they immediately got him mental health services. He pulled out for the semester. And that was, but we're now taking these kids and we're disengaging their parents and they're doing more damage. I hate to say it, than they realize. They're doing more damage, even if they're well intended.
Well, I'm not going to mention the names of these celebrities, but there are a number of celebrities that basically have been adopting children and then they're transgendering their children and saying, "Wow, I've got four kids and they're all transgender." Isn't that spectacular? That's so wonderful. And then you see these from multiple, celebrities, and you think to yourself, "Well, what are the odds of you adopting four children and they're all, under 10, right? And they're all transgender children. What are the odds of that? It's like astronomical, the odds, right? You better chance of winning the lotto. Um, and so the culture is really moving against the kids, right? And now if the schools are jumping on that bandwagon, you've got the social aspect of it, and then you've got the schools jumping on it, and you hide stuff from the parents. It's a really tough thing, and I don't want to go too far down the transgender rabbit hole because it's, again, it's a personal issue between the child, their parents, their psychologist, whatever. But you do see the suicide rates among these kids skyrocketing, and
Those who
got to be a
those
reason for that.
those who transition commit suicide at higher rates than those who do not. And there's a mental illness, and then you think this is the solution. And I don't want to get into, because at the end of the day, we do want to help all our children, our boys, our girls, our gender questioning kids. Like we want to help them all. And I don't doubt that. I mean, I think overwhelmingly that's how people feel. And I think that the celebrity thing in itself, it's an altered reality going on, and it's statistically improbable. It just is, And so I think we need to not be afraid to say, look, we need to look at this from a brain sex point of view, because it's something like 0.3% of the population could be like have what Michael calls a trans brain, where like the male brain is functioning like a female. But I look at it this way. I look at if that is the case, and it's so incredibly rare. It's not like what's happening today. It's so incredibly rare. If the person knew how their brain functioned, and there are places, there are very few. Amen clinics is one of them where you can actually do the type of brain scan. It tells you what's going on in your brain. Um, and most of those kids who are, say, in that position, maybe when you understand how your brain, oh, that's why I'm interested in this, and that's why I like nurturing. There's other, when you begin to know why your brain functions, that explains a lot of your behavior or your predilections, right? Now, that's in brain sex dysphoria is something very different than gender dysphoria. So those are two separate things, and people really need to understand that. And the gender dysphoria component that we're seeing in our schools needs to be dealt with, because most of those kids will grow out of it and just move on with their lives, or they may realize they're gay. That's what happens. But telling them they should be, engaged. I don't believe in, and this is just me personally now, none of this stuff should be happening. And at these, for these children, because not in a place to be doing it.
Yeah, well, it shouldn't be happening in the schools because it's just not the school's position to do. Period. I don't care what anybody says. It's just not the school's. Like you said, if you're unless you're a practicing psychologist, psychiatrist, then maybe you could step up and do this. But just it shouldn't happening in schools. Schools should not be keeping any secrets from parents regarding the children, regardless of anything. I mean, if a kid fell on the school ground and broke their arm, are you going to hide it from their parents and just try to make the kid hide their broken arm? I mean, it's insanity, right?
Yeah,
But listen, you've been amazing. I'm so
but
thankful for your time. I don't want to take up too much more time. I tried to be respectful of people's times, but I
and
did lie to you earlier. I lied like a rug. I did not have just the one "what if you could" question. I actually have two questions, so
all
please
right.
forgive me for lying. Um, so I always ask my "what if you could" question at the beginning, and I give that one to you. But at the end, I always ask my folks a second question. And that question is, it could be any topic that means something to you. But if there's something that just means something to Sean, a quote, a thought, something moving forward, something that you're just passionate about, that you'd love to leave everybody with, what would that one thought be?
Well, if you don't know, there's a really wonderful poem by Seamus Heaney called Mint. And at the end of the poem, it begins, "We fail them by our disregard."
Mm,
And so that sticks with me with this particular topic. And for whatever reason, that came to mind when you started to ask my question. But it's probably, Seamus Heaney, Irish poet, Nobel laureate, passed away a number of years ago. Uh, but his poem Mint really is it's a wonderful poem, but it really, although he's talking about the Irish condition, it really has a universal application, um, because it talks about this mint plant, which is really a metaphor, and some of the leaves are picked and appreciated, and others are left in the garbage and what have you. And it really is about, we fail them by our disregard. We fail those who we disregard. And so with that, but again, we have an opportunity to bring the mint to light, to appreciate its essence, to appreciate what it can do for us when we put it into a glass of water with some tea, right? That's our children. That's who they are. We need to bring them out, not disregard them, and bring them into the light.
yeah, that is so true, my friend. I mean, honest to goodness, I mean, it's just so bizarre because I had a really good chat with it on another podcast where we talked about the kids and what's going on and stuff like that with the foster system. And all I could kept thinking that the rest of that day was that Whitney Houston song about "I believe the children are the future." And I didn't say anything to him, but he just made me think of it, and I just couldn't stop thinking about that. I believe the children are the future, let them lead the way. And it's just so crucial. I mean, if there's one thing that we were put on earth to take care of, I think, is our kids. And the fact that we're just letting other people take care of our children or society and schools, and I don't know. It just seems so wrong to me. And that's why I really wanted to talk to you, being a boy dad, especially. So Sean Coleman, do me a favor. So tell us about your book. Do you have it with you? You can
Yes,
hold the book
sir.
up. Tell us about your book. Where do we find you? So
Um,
it is, what's the title again?
so, Boys a Rescue Plan: Moving Beyond the Politics of Masculinity to Healthy Male Development. And we can get it on Amazon. So, please get your copy on Amazon. You can always reach out to me at seank@gibm.us. And you can always reach out to me there, or Sean James Coleman. Just put the James in the middle of Coleman at gmail.com. And you can reach out to me there.
What about, like, are you on Facebook
Oh,
or
yeah,
any
I'm
of that
sorry.
stuff?
Yeah. You can follow me on Twitter at inhiswords.us.
In his
X, I'm
words
sorry,
dot
on
us.
X. Inhiswords.us. I also have a Substack, inhiswords.us. So if you go inhiswords.us, you can find me on Substack as well. Please subscribe. Articles. I write about all kinds of important issues impacting boys and men, and not just from the physical stuff, but also the politics of it. And I'll actually be in DC meeting with policymakers at the very first couple days in April, and I do educate policymakers on this stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, well, we need people getting involved. So, that's awesome that you're doing that. It's so powerful. Any other social stuff? Facebook, Instagram, any of that other stuff? TikTok, you got any of that stuff?
X and Substack is where I'm at right now. When you talk about boys and men issues, there are those who are a little more welcoming than others, sadly. And unfortunately, we need more policymakers to be a little more. There have some who are really getting behind this issue. Recently, not 2 years ago, was it? I guess now a year and a half ago, Josh Hawley came out with his book Manhood. Again, Richard Reeves came out of Boys and Men for the American Institute for Boys and Men, was just established. So there's some movement happening. And so, like you said earlier, there needs to be this little bit of shift happening, and I think there is. I think there's a need for some more male energy, and
Well, I like the people who are starting to bring it. The Joe Rogans, the Zuckerbergs. You can hate him, Elon Musk. You can hate him if you want. Um, Bezos. You're seeing a lot of very prominent, exposed people changing how they are, as if almost to say. I mean, I watched Zuckerberg on a podcast. It's like it was almost tough to say I do MMA. It was almost tough to say I'm kind of Rogan's like, dude, you look buff. You're out there getting punched in the face. How does that feel? He goes, it feels really, really good, you know, to be a man. And I think we got so far, the pendulum, you know how it swings, right? I mean, it just went so far the other way. We just need to bring it back to the middle. We're not trying to like hurt anybody or be against anybody, right? It's just flat out nothing wrong with women being women and men being men. It's just there's just nothing wrong with that. I don't know why it's become a battle, right, Sean? It's just crazy.
and we're not going to change it.
Yeah.
It's going to be men. There's going to be women. It's going to be boys. There's going to be girls.
Yeah, I love it. So,
That's
all right, everybody.
out of
We
control.
had the pleasure of meeting with Sean Kullman. Please go find his book. It is Boys, a Rescue Plan, Moving Beyond the Politics of Masculinity to Healthy Male Development. It's co-authored with Michael Gurian. Gurian, awesome. And you've been wonderful. I appreciate everything you're doing for our boys and for our families and for our girls. And it was really great to chat with you, my friend. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Gary. Live the dream.
All right, guys. We'll see ya.
Cheers.
Thanks again for joining us on another episode of What If You Could podcast. Please subscribe, like, share, and give us any feedback. We'd love to hear it. And remember, if you can dream it, you can do it. See you next time.